This isn't right. These people will never change. But then they weren't people. Not really. They were fae, and to refer to them as people would be insulting to humans. I'd only heard about them in, well, fairy tales up until a couple of years ago when one turned up on my doorstep claiming to be my father. I didn't want to believe him, but the moment I looked into his eyes, I saw my own peering back at me. Liquid blue eyes that in just the right light shimmered purple. I'd never seen someone with eyes like mine before. That, coupled with the fact that I had some abilities that weren't easily explained until his arrival, it wasn't hard to believe that I wasn't entirely human. Knowing what little my mother had told me about my father, building a relationship with him hadn't been something I was keen to do, but I hadn't been given much of a chance. He'd had plans for my life and had made it very clear that if I didn't cooperate, I wouldn't have a life to live at all. He'd brought me to the fairy realm, simply known as fairy, to explain my heritage and to introduce me to the ways of my kind, and to a fiancé I had no desire to marry. It was only by a stroke of luck that the fiancé hadn't quite reached the age of required marriage, and I'd been given passage to return home until the time of my wedding. I still had to make weekly appearances when the fae gathered, and if I didn't, I'd be hunted, captured, and punished in ways I could only begin to imagine if I disobeyed. I'd be lying, though, if I said the thought of escaping hadn't crossed my mind on a damn near hourly basis, but where could I go that they wouldn't find me? I stood in a great open meadow with mostly decayed trees lining the perimeter, pretending like I was engrossed with the presentation going on in front of the great crowd of fairies. Bony fingers interlaced with my own as I looked up into the face of Brogan, the fairy I'd been promised to. He was handsome and mostly kind, if somewhat aloof, but I felt nothing for him. I felt nothing for anyone anymore, save for my best friend Cora, and even that was a struggle at times. She was the best sort of friend a person could hope for, but I'd lost a part of myself, the part that made it easy to be social, easy to connect, and we'd mostly drifted apart save for a few obligatory texts and an occasional lunch date every now and then.
"Fiona,"
he said, bowing his head before turning his attention to Ain, the queen of the fairies, as she stood from the mangled throne that had once been a tree thriving in the middle of a lush, now dying forest. She made her way forward toward the congregation, her body moving in a way that was very similar to the way a snake slithers with its synchronized undulations. She paced back and forth with eerie grace as she spouted hatred toward the vampires for killing the Fae King ages ago. Her curly, almost white hair stayed in place, never bouncing or shifting as she sauntered along. Her body lithe, her feet barely making an impression in the plush grass as she took each step. Thin fingers motioned toward those watching her with bated breath as she spoke. "We must avenge our king," she said, firm and even in tone. This was no suggestion. Not a plea, not a request. It was an order. "The vampires have all but forgotten about what they have done to our kind. We're the punchline to their jokes, nothing more than a bedtime story they tell their children, boasting of their triumph as if we were mere fleas they swatted away with ease. They neglect to tell the details of the full story, the one where their victory only came because of one lone vampire with abilities none of us could have ever predicted. They lie by omission when they don't tell their spawn of how we slaughtered them relentlessly for months, or how they nearly starved to death because of us. They must pay for what they have done. They must pay for taking my love away and for tearing my life to bits. But more importantly, they must pay for taking your king's life." The crowd cheered loudly, bloodlust hanging heavily in the air, threatening to erupt into a great storm of war at a moment's notice.